This video is sponsored by Sabotage Studios. Sea of Stars is the most anticipated indie game this year, but does it live up to the astronomically high expectations set before it, and if so, how? Well, that's not exactly a simple answer, and to fully understand it, we need a bit of context. So let's start with what makes this game special on a very basic surface level. Oh, but before we start, I'm not going to spoil anything. All footage will be from the first 3 to 5 hours of the game, and while I will reference some things from slightly later on, I'll be very vague about them. However, if at any point the game sounds interesting to you, you can pause the video, scroll down to the description, and click the link to get the game for yourself. There's this surreal feeling that washes over you as you play Sea of Stars. It's this indescribable mixture of nostalgia and awe. You're constantly reminded of the past while simultaneously being granted a window into the future, and you can see this in dozens of different aspects of the game. The overworld map may seem familiar to those who have played older JRPGs from the 90s. Equally, the use of pixel art along with music that harkens back to the golden age while still feeling distinct and new shows us a trend that permeates through the entire game. I mean, take the combat for example. Sure, it's turn-based, which isn't exactly new, but the way it's executed is. It's so much more than the basic attacking and healing of old. There's a genuinely deep combat system on display that requires a fair bit of strategy. I'll talk more in depth about that later. You could also literally look at the graphics and just general presentation of the game. Pixel art isn't some new revolutionary style, but I can count on exactly one hand the number of games that look like this. The use of music here is excellent as well. The battle theme doesn't just cut and end. It instead does this cool thing. I don't really know what you call it. I'm not a music guy. Here, let me just show you. You see what I mean? Or hear, I guess? They do this in cutscenes and areas too, where the music will subtly shift if you're inside a house or out in the open with more suppressed versions of the same song playing inside. The lighting, not just the graphics, but how the game is actually illuminated is very deliberate and calculated too. There's a theme of orange and blue everywhere representing the sun and the moon. This can be seen all over the place, from the more obvious examples like the color scheme of Valir and Zale, the main characters, to far more discreet things like torches in this house creating a warmer side both literally and aesthetically, while the moonlight that floods through the window creates a visually appealing contrast that you're bound to notice even if only subconsciously. There really are no words I can use to describe the look and feel of this game. It's something you kinda just have to see for yourself through videos or gameplay. I knew I'd enjoy this game based on the presentation alone because in a way it almost looks like the image of these classic games that I have in my head. But crucially, what makes this game so special is not its use of these classic elements, but what it adds on top of them. Sea of Stars uses nostalgia not as a crutch, but as one of the many tools in its arsenal to craft a brilliant experience that you really will struggle to find elsewhere. This becomes especially obvious when you look at the combat. It revives elements of the past that have been long since forgotten, adds its own flair, and creates an experience quite unlike anything we've seen in a long time. Let me show you. Combat in Sea of Stars is extraordinary, and when I first saw the game and played the demo, I knew it would be my favorite part of the game. However, I was actually wrong. There's one part outside of the combat that might be even better. More on that later. For now, let's talk about the combat of Sea of Stars. So to understand the combat here, we're gonna need to go over the basics. I already mentioned before that this combat system is turn-based, but right off the bat, Sea of Stars does something to mix it up. Now, there's a bit of a problem with turn-based combat by itself, and great games do a pretty good job at solving this. Turn-based combat usually devolves into attack when healthy, heal when not. And because it's turn-based and there's no other way for the player to interact with the game outside of those two options, the game ends up feeling kinda boring and simple. But like I said, great games can solve this, and Sea of Stars is one of them. So it does this in a few ways, each of which builds upon the last to create something incredible, and as I describe these individual elements, the pieces will begin to come together and you'll be able to see the big picture. Remember how I said Sea of Stars mixes things up right off the bat with the traditional turn-based style? Well, here's how. The timer. This thing over an enemy's head dictates when it'll act. Simple enough, right? Each action you take counts as one move, and each of those moves lowers the timer. Next up is the live mana system. Basically, when you hit enemies with normal attacks, and only with normal attacks, keep that in mind, it'll be important later, they drop these small orbs that you can then absorb to add magic onto your normal attacks or enhance your spells. The last important thing about the live mana system is that you can only absorb 3 orbs at a time, and by extension, you can't fill the field with 50 of them. Once there are 3, no more will spawn. Finally, there's the part that ties all of this together, the magic system, or more broadly, the special move system. Basically, enemies can do these special moves just like you can, but theirs can be interrupted with the right combination of attacks. Not only does this stop them from using their special move, it also interrupts their turn. And to further incentivize you to do this, these special moves can do serious damage or totally alter the flow of the fight. So if you just ignore them, things can get out of control pretty fast. The symbols here will tell you which type of attacks will prevent the special move. Now with all of this information, if you've been paying attention, you can probably already see why this system is so brilliant. But if you still can't see it, allow me to clear things up. So enemies can occasionally use special moves with timers on them. These special moves can only be interrupted with a combination of multiple, often varied types of attacks, and the live mana system allows you to add an element onto your basic attack or strengthen your own special moves. This creates a level of depth and strategy to the combat that really makes you plan out each of your moves. You can and should develop strategies, plan for the future, and press this silly red button when fighting. I often leave at least 1 orb on the field in case a monster decides to use a special attack that I'll need an element to counter. But you don't have to play it safe like that. You can simply build up 3 orbs and attempt to blow the opposition away with an enhanced magic attack because an enemy can't use their special if they're dead. But Sea of Stars doesn't just stop there. The combo system adds yet another more supplemental layer to this combat. The combos are attacks that utilize multiple members of the party to unleash an array of different effects. Some are simple, like a pure high damage physical attack, but some are more situational, like heals or AoEs. Lastly, there's what may be my favorite part of the combat, the ability to enhance both your attacks and defenses. Remember earlier when I said, and because it's turn-based and there's no other way for the player to interact with the game outside of those 2 options? Well, that's not totally true in Sea of Stars. If you press A at the right moment, you can either block an incoming attack, significantly reducing the damage, or you can enhance your own attack, significantly increasing the damage. This small addition creates exciting moments where instead of feeling hopeless because you know the next attack is going to deal too much damage, or because you know you won't be able to do enough, you can take matters into your own hands and pull through with pure skill alone. On top of all of this, there are tons of options for difficulty scaling along with post-battle healing, things that increase the window for timing attacks, and plenty of others. So even if you feel one aspect of the game is a bit too challenging, or you just prefer to play in a slightly different way, that option is available to you. But I did say at the start of this section that this is only my second favorite part of the game. So let me show you the aspect of Sea of Stars that totally blindsided me and may well end up being my favorite part of this game. If I had to use one word to describe exploration in Sea of Stars, that word would be purposeful. There are just so many valid reasons to explore in this game, and it's not just what you find, it's what you do as well. But let's talk about that first part. Exactly what can you expect to find when traversing in these picturesque environments? The first thing we need to talk about is cooking. The relatively discreet aspect of this mechanic that may not be immediately obvious to the untrained eye is that it actually allows you to use the ingredients you've gathered to cook food. The food that you cook can be used for a plethora of different effects like restoring health, mana, or both at once. Crucially, however, you can only carry 10 meals at a time. This adds to the depth of the cooking mechanic since now you have to think about what food would be best to cook. Maybe you're not worried about your health since you have a great healing spell, so you just go all out with mana food. But maybe that healing spell only works on one party member at a time, so you might want to slot in some AoE healing as well. This system is surprisingly well thought out, but what exactly does it have to do with exploration? Well, that's simple. One of the most common things you'll find in the overworld are ingredients that you can use to cook different meals. These sparkling things are found all over the place, and they incentivize you to explore as much as you can to find them, because as I mentioned earlier, the meal effects are equal parts varied and valuable. Naturally, since this is a JRPG, there are also plenty of treasure chests around. These contain armor, weapons, and other useful trinkets to make your character more powerful. You can buy a lot of these in stores, but if you want to save money, you can just explore to find them instead. Speaking of money, another thing that these treasure chests often house are expensive gems that you can sell to make more of it. There are even hidden scrolls that teach you new combo moves to utilize in battle. There's plenty more to find, but I'd rather save the bigger secrets for you to discover, so for now, let's talk about the second part. What can you actually do when exploring? This is the part that really caught me off guard. I mean, look, Sabotage just made an excellent platformer. It was literally their previous game, but I didn't expect to see so many shades of that in Sea of Stars. The way this world is designed lends itself surprisingly well to these traversal-based puzzles that ask you to find a path to a treasure chest, or figure out how to reach a high enough point that the momentum from your jump will break the floor. There are places where you can see a ledge too high to reach and a hole right above it. To get up to that ledge, you'll have to leave the cave or house that you're in, make your way around the outside, and search for a hole so you can descend through that second entrance. These are all over the place, and the verticality of this world really lends itself to this type of design philosophy. Just walking around and exploring in this world, figuring out how to get from point A to point B, and that moment where you find the solution where you're rewarded for your efforts is a wonderful feeling that I genuinely didn't expect. And all of this is just barely scratching the surface of the outstanding things you can do and see in this game. I mean, I haven't even talked about how the exploration actually gets better as you progress, or about the bosses and their unique mechanics, or even the most meaningful, important mechanic in the entire game, fishing. There's so much more I could talk about, but I'd rather you spend that time actually playing this game than watching a video on it. So check out the link in the description, because this game is out right now, and if you have any interest in games like this, you'd really be doing yourself a disservice in not trying it out.